our COBT listeners and viewers. It's Maynard, Mike, and Jeff here with something that's very special. And it reminds us of why we're so glad we have this podcast and why we've been doing all this work. We have connected with William Clouston, who's the party leader of the Social Democratic Party in the United Kingdom. And the reason we reached out to them and to him and his team is because recently the party put out a paper, call it the Energy Abundance Paper. We'll connect it to the podcast so you can all see what we're talking about. But in explaining to William why we were so excited to get him to come on the show and talk to us, we were sharing with him that one of the themes that we have been dealing with for 5 years is this phenomenon where governments are making complex energy and environmental and national security decisions. And sometimes, frequently, it's resulting in things that are neither good for the economy or the environment. I won't get ahead of the paper, but it's fascinating. And what's been happening in Europe in particular is fascinating. So let me just stop talking for a minute and say, William Clouston, we are delighted to have you. What an honor.
Thanks very much for the invitation, Maynard. Great to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're excited. Well, Mike, before we jump in with William, what would you tell us about what's happening in the markets?
Yeah, Maynard, for most people, Friday was an ugly day in the markets. So the markets are down.
For most people.
Yeah, pretty substantially, right? Because, Trump was talking about Chinese tariffs, and that kind of has slipped to the side. And right now we're up around 2% this week in the markets. And that's generally because the big banks are reporting, most of them reported today, pretty good numbers. And so those stocks are up. So financials are up around 2.5% this week. But just the sectors that continue to lead all year long, consumer discretionary, because you got the Googles and the Amazons and stuff like that. Technology is up, and utilities are up because it's the electricity trade, right? And so those sectors are up around between 1.5%-2% this week as well. And so that's where we are. I'd say from a crude oil standpoint, we now have crude oil below $60 a barrel. We got as low as $58 a barrel. Today, we're back at $59 a barrel. And I think some of the reasons why we're here is, first of all, I think this Gaza peace plan, created a little bit of selling. Point number one. Point number two is the markets are going to be in an oversupply situation. The big issue is how much oversupply is it going to be? Today, the IEA came out and said it's going to be 4 million barrels a day in 2026. That is complete crap. It's not going to be 4 million barrels in oversupply. The question is it going to be 1 million? It's going to be 4 million. It's probably going to be closer to probably 1 million barrels, but it's still oversupplied, right? And so every month from here to the end of the year, we're going to be in a more oversupplied situation. And so I think what had happened is most people were sitting there saying that fundamentally the market is oversupplied in 2026, but crude oil would just not break. And what's happened is crude oil is broken. And so what happens is traders just jump on that. And so I think what you're seeing right now is oil traders saying, it's finally here. We don't know what was happening. And now they're pushing it slower. So I think that's why we're sitting there at $59 a barrel crude right now. It's just because traders are pushing it because they're getting that signal. Now, the thing that's interesting is you're hearing it from like Total, Exxon, a lot of these major oil companies are talking about the intermediate price, the long-term outlook for oil price looks really good, which kind of tells you that they probably think it looks pretty bad near term, is the way I look at it. And so I think what traders right now and investors are trying to understand is like, how do we basically look through the next 6 months? How do we position ourselves for the next 6 months for something that looks like it could be a nice secular market over the next 2, 3, 4 years? And so I think that's where we are in the crude oil market. The last thing I really want to talk about is like, we've been talking about these IPOs, like Fermi IPO a couple of weeks back. You had Rockpoint Gas Storage last week. They've all done pretty well. And so fuel cell companies, these IPP companies, basically SMR companies, they've all done extremely well. And this week, the name that's done well is Bloom Energy. We had Bloom Energy on COBT, I don't know, 2, 3 weeks ago. And that stock is up around 30% this week on a deal with basically Brookfield. They're going to use them as sort of an exclusive supplier of their fuel cells for their AI data centers going forward. That stock was up 30%. Like I said, huge gainer this year. It's up around 400% this year. A lot of these stocks are up this much this year, and it's just everything AI is basically a craze, and so these stocks continue to go up. So The last thing we really want to say, before we get into this is just so, give you an idea what's going on in European markets this year. Great Britain, FTSE is up 23% this year. The CAC is up 20%. German DAX is up 37%. The Spanish IBEX is up 50%. So European equity markets are up around 28-30% this year. S&P 500 is up 13%. The Nasdaq's up 17%. They look great, but the European markets are up even more. So huge outperformance in those names. So we'll just go ahead and hand it back to you after that.
Okay. Jeff, anything you'd throw in before we jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate a point that Arjun made in his weekly Substack, and it ties into our guest today, and that's really in and around coal. So often, whether it's a company or an agency, their long-term energy forecasts or scenarios, it's going to get press, or it's going to get renowned. It's going to get known for what is the oil number, what is the gas number, and I think the tell that we use in looking at how serious to take these scenarios and how serious to take the analytical rigor that went into it is, what is the coal assumption? Because so often coal is used as a plug for some other agenda. It could be environmental, it could be to show big gas growth, it could be any number of things. But just being thoughtful in and around that coal assumption is, I think, really valuable and real telling how serious to take the other assumptions. As we've talked about lots and lots of times, energy decisions, lots of times are regional, and lots of times there's national security elements to those. And so just having a blanket assumption in and around coal is really, not that analytically rigorous. So I think that's Arjun made that point on Saturday, but I thought it's worth giving some more airtime, especially as we talk about this energy abundance paper.
Well, it's a really good lead in because, William, your paper, it attacks some of the problems that the UK has had in energy, and it proposes that the government get back involved and really be a planning and executing agency, and suggests, you caught my ear with this one, Jeff, it suggests first step, build some gas plants and build some coal plants. So look, that's just a quick lead in. Again, thank you for joining. We're very excited to hear about this paper and your thought process behind it, how it's being received, just anything you would share. We're really delighted to have you.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. I mean, the first thing I should do is actually explain why we wrote it. I mean,
that would be great.
Why did we need to write it? I mean, we've as a party, we produced, papers on economics and industry and farming and food and so on. But we wrote it because Britain is in really quite a catastrophic energy crisis. I mean, it's literally staring us in the face. And certainly for international viewers, I'd remind people that the post-Second World War Britain was a pioneer in nuclear energy. This particular energy was basically invented in Britain and rolled out in the late 40s, 50s. And that was an era in which the state had a very, very strong role. You had the Central Electricity Generating Board, basically state generated electricity, and so the grid was controlled. Both power generation and distribution was the state, and the record on the data was very, very good. 3% increase in supply year on year in real terms, and energy prices were reasonable. And therefore, I mean, energy is the master industry. You can't do anything else without it. So that period of time was actually fairly conducive to productivity and manufacturing. And we did okay in those terms. There were challenges, but we did okay. What's happened over the last 20, 25 years is there's been a complete neglect of we think, the state's role in energy production and distribution. And as a result, Britain now has the highest industrial energy prices in the world, basically. We have prices which are so high that the little manufacturing we've got left, and that's about 9% of GDP now, is being throttled. And basically any energy intensive industry is struggling and being decimated. So, barely a month goes by when you won't hear about a cement plant or an ammonia plant closing down, or even bulk chemicals. because of this crisis. So we have to look at it. We have to try and address it, and it is urgent. So we wrote the paper because basically the three problems are: we have too little power, it's too expensive, and we rely too much on imports.
Could I ask you, since you put it out, which I think was in September,
Mm.
what sort of reactions have you been getting from the conservatives and from the Labor Party, from the people, the media? What would you tell us about the splash that it's gotten?
Well, we've been very pleased. Actually, there's been a couple of pieces in the Critic magazine, and the Daily Telegraph, which is the biggest high quality newspaper in the United Kingdom, covered it in their business section, had a whole piece on it. Andrew Oslowski covered it, so we're very pleased about that. Politically, it's very interesting, actually, Maynard, because it's funny when you coin a phrase, start talking about energy abundance, the need for energy abundance, how critical it is. And suddenly you'll read a lot of journalism, and the Spectator magazine, which again is on the conservative side, is the high quality magazine that's produced once a week. They start coining the phrase energy abundance, and it didn't come from nowhere. I mean, we have put that on the agenda. I'm not a conservative, as you might guess, leader of the SDP, but I spoke at the Conservative Party conference a few days ago in a big fringe meeting. And I think I held the room. And I think there were lots of industrialists and lots of farmers and lots of other people that are in there, and their future depends on reliable, affordable energy. So I was sort of, speaking to an open door, really. But so it's gone very well. I'm delighted we've put it on the agenda.
Would you maybe help us with a little bit of British energy history? Because I was thinking, the North Sea, when it this is just anecdotal, but it was a huge source of wealth for the UK, for Norway. How does a country go from being basically energy independent, you might say, or in the position you were in, to where you've ended up? You would have said, if you'd gone back to, I don't know, I'm thinking 1985, and said, in 2025, this is where Britain's going to be, I think somebody would have said, no, there's no way they'll do that. Or what would you give us on the history of how it kind of got here?
Well, I mean, energy, oil and gas exploration in the North Sea goes back to the 50s, and we actually had a different model to the Norwegians. The Norwegians, as you know, were very statist. Actually, Statoil basically control oil and gas exploration, production, and as a result, they have a colossal sovereign wealth fund, which runs into trillions. I mean, the Norwegians actually are so wealthy, they can't spend the money. I mean, it's they try and their issue is how the capacity of their economy can follow that. We went on a slightly different model. There was much more private sector involvement in the North Sea in the 70s and 80s, and basically the life cycle was burnt up. It peaked in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's been allowed to sort of dwindle and die. We would argue that one of the big problems that we have is that ideologically, particularly in the last 10 years, 15, 12 years, 10 years, governments have deliberately throttled it. So I can tell you, close to Shetland, which is the most northerly it's the most northerly archipelago in the North Sea, Rosebank Field is there, and private enterprise has tried to get licensing to roll it out, and has been met with total resistance from governments of both stripes. So as soon as you get into net zero ideology, as soon as you get into that, it gets basically there are impediments. It's in the paper. They've throttled it. They're not interested in exploiting it for ideological reasons. And that's a problem, because where we end up is pipelines from Norway supplying gas to us. And these are the same fields, remember, Maynard. It's the same fields in the same sea, basically. And we buy their gas, and we don't exploit our own, which is utterly crazy. And as a result, I mean, it's staggering, because we run into tens of billions of energy imports. About 40% of our energy is imported, and I think it's about as disastrous a result as we could have had. Very expensive domestic energy and huge amounts of it imported. So that's basically the story of it. I think we've cocked it up. I think it's not. I think there's certainly reserves. In fact, I mean, the Norwegians found some additional reserves 2 weeks ago and publicized it. So there's plenty there that could be done. I realize it's more expensive. It's not, the easier developed fields have been taken a long time ago, but there's still plenty there. And if you had a government that was committed to the industry and wasn't keen on throttling it, you could exploit it and narrow our trade gap and get some energy produced.
I was watching one of your speeches, and you said something that we've wondered about here that's very interesting, which is, and you'll say it much better than I'm going to ask it, but basically you talked about leadership, and without using these words, you basically said, leadership has let down the people it's obligated to help. And we see this pattern, and it's really interesting. It makes you wonder what leadership thinks it's supposed to be doing. But do you mind just talking a little bit about the culture around leadership and how maybe that helped get us into this unfortunate situation?
I'm glad you raised the word, the issue of culture, because a lot of people look at causes and causal pathways and what is the real reason something happens. And actually, we think in our party, we think virtually all of the economic problems we have cultural causes. And the first problem we have, I think, is indifference. I mean, I think in the United States, you've had industrially, I think both Britain and the United States have been, in terms of manufacturing, have been indifferent to what is made where and by whom, and even indifferent, particularly in Britain's case, indifferent to who owns what. So that's a cultural problem. If you don't care who is in charge of your energy system, I'm afraid you have a cultural problem. Part of my family is South Korean. They don't really have that problem. They think these things are important and they value them. So, I mean, I think in Britain's case, the first problem started 20, 30 years ago, where energy ministers did not take domestic supply and security seriously. I think that's the problem. And if you start there and you don't build, you'll down the line. And the sad thing is, it's 10, 15 years down the line. That's when it really comes to bite you, and then it becomes urgent, and it becomes more costly to turn around, of course, as well. So yeah, I mean, if you're led by people that just don't, there's too much high time preference, too much, too keen on jam today and not tomorrow, you're going to run into problems. So another thing I use, there aren't many good equations in economics, but one that broadly is correct is savings equal investment equal future prosperity. And I think the basic idea is that we haven't invested enough in our energy system. That's the cause of it.
Do you think it is, this has come up lately, we were looking at Jim Ratcliffe's, some of his videos and some of the work that they've put out. Is it too late for Europe to Europe? That's too big. Let's just take the UK. Is it too late for the UK to really lean into this and dramatically turn this around? I hope you're going to say it still can be done, but it seems like we're late innings in this problem. That's a baseball term. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I know. No. It's got to be turned. You have no choice, Maynard. Actually, even if it's going to be challenging and difficult, you've got to do it. I mean, if you just consider the difference in cost and value, in our energy abundance green paper, we've costed the grid stabilization process at 100 to 150 billion. A key quality in a politician and a leader is to know the difference between cost and value. And I think it would be crazy not to invest that money. In fact, one of the things that the Green Paper does, using some research that was done by the OECD, is to try and quantify the loss of productivity to the general economy in the last 20, 25 years. And we calculate it. I don't think it's actually been done before. We calculate it's something like 3 trillion, about the size of the UK economy, or equivalent of total debt. Now, I don't think we're asking for very much. I think if we say we think we should spend 100 billion, 150 billion on grid stabilization, and initially some gas plants and coal, and then roll out a proper baseload system in nuclear, I think it would be foolish not to do it. I mean, that's my point. I mean, it would be utterly foolish. And whether you think it's late, better late than never.
You know, our friend Lars in Germany will love this, but it seems like the UK is in worse position than Germany at this point. And, you know, it's kind of what I read from this paper, and that's really perplexing to me. You know, we talked earlier about this rush into AI, right? People are spending a lot of money, and that's predicated on very low prices. I mean, whoever has the low prices gets to win here. The US is making that a really, really big industrial bet on that. Maybe talk about, you know, the UK, you know, given where prices are, given that you're very uncompetitive. I mean, what does this mean for just, you know, the future of AI for you guys? I mean, are we going to look 10 years down the road that, you know, you mentioned earlier that basically it's a miracle that, you know, our productivity is only stagnated rather than collapsed. Given the AI, you know, that we see coming, are we going to potentially see productivity collapse potentially in the UK because of this?
It's collapsing now. So we are literally, as I said, week by week, month by month, we're losing manufacturing capacity, and it's catastrophic and beggaring because you know, say one of the aims that the Labour government has is to build 1.5 million homes in its term, so 300,000 homes a year. Now, to do that, you're going to have some cement for concrete, but we import about a third of our cement now. We don't have the capacity to do it. And why is that? It's because we lost our production because energy is too expensive. So once it starts, it gets worse. The AI question is a much bigger one. I don't know what your view is on it, but I'm concerned that there's there's almost overinvestment, I think, going into it. I think it looks very toppy, very boomy to me. Just as my background is in commercial property, so I'm used to cycles and I'm used to exuberance, and you know, the quantum of investments and also the enterprise value of particularly in the US, your big firms. It looks toppy, and what I'm not convinced about is there a route to actually getting revenue charged on it? So I think a lot of those, we'll see in a year's time, won't we? See what happens to this market, but I struggle to define it. I think in terms of data centers, we need them anyway. If you call it out, you can call it AI if you like it, and we have projects that are up and running and you know, big investment in it. But I do worry about the grid to support it. I mean, I really do. I think that's a major problem for us.
It really mystifies me that, you know, the energy prices are so expensive in the UK. I mean, where's the disconnect? Where are the politicians? Where are the consumers basically screaming at these politicians? You know what? This is a big issue. Let's get something done. It doesn't seem like anything's happening. Is it because they don't know how bad it is? Or, you know, I'm just trying to get a sense for, like, are we going to sit here a year from now, we have you back on the show, we're going to see a lot of movement on this? I mean, or are we still sort of in this abyss where people are saying, we'll see how it works out?
No, I think that's a really good point you make. I think it's a problem. It's a cultural problem that goes into SW1 and the ruling elite. So they've all, I mean, you ask why do we have very, very high energy prices? And it's certainly, I mean, you know, the spike in gas prices in the Russia-Ukraine war didn't help, but that's not the cause of it. Honestly, that is not the cause. The cause is policy costs and net zero costs. And that is a cultural problem because they've hooked the entire economy. Is that, you know, the German economy's made very similar errors, although they're burning coal now. Why on earth do they get out of nuclear? It's utterly crazy, very, very strange. But no, I mean, we're governed by people that are basically ideologically committed to net zero. And when I try and explain this I mean, people know, right? So there is political power. I think there's been a vibe shift in particularly the last year, but obviously Russia-Ukraine war, energy price spikes for consumers didn't help. But so people know about it. It is a political issue now. But you're still, when I try and explain it to the causes to people, I do so in quite a crude way. And I remind people that renewables, whether it's solar or wind power, we've got a lot of wind power in the UK, particularly in Scotland, which is the wrong place because it's not where the demand is. So you've got transmission problems. But yeah, remember that hydrocarbons and gas are so efficient, you can tax them. And renewables are so inefficient, you have to subsidize them. That's the basic difference. And in that line, politically, you've explained the whole problem.
I loved the point you made there. I wanted to circle back. It isn't. You mentioned it's increasingly an issue for the voters. But maybe just talk about how that's evolved, and where does this sit on the priority scale for voters? Just I mean, it's more just kind of educating us on where the UK would sit today.
I think in the United Kingdom, it's not. I mean, what cultural matters have risen up in terms of political saliency. So the top issue is immigration and the effects of immigration. I think that's partly because governments have lost control of their borders. Literally on the south coast, you have tens of thousands of people wandering in undocumented, and you had the same problem on your southern border, and depends on your view, but thankfully, if you believe in nation-state democracy, you really need borders. It's not a bad idea to have a border. So that is number one. The general economy I would describe as probably number two. But no, the energy crisis is becoming a big issue simply because if you're losing a job, and as I say, people are losing their jobs in manufacturing, and these are good jobs. I mean, I think across the West, but I mean, if you look at why do so many people in the so-called Rust Belt of the United States vote for Trump? Cleveland, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. Why do they? Well, because the foundation of the family 40 years ago was the industrial wage. The industrial wage was the foundation of the family. So we've lost that. But in terms of in terms of base politics, people's household budgets now, we have very, very high housing costs in the UK, and we have very high energy costs, and it's squeezing budgets to the extent that basically in Britain, we haven't had any real wage growth for about 20 years. And productivity, on a macro scale, macroeconomics, we've had very little productivity growth either. Certainly on a per capita basis, we've had none because the population has expanded through mass migration. So we're in a real pickle. So energy, yes, it's definitely an issue at political meetings I go to up and down the country. People talk about it a lot now.
Well, and now we've had a little bit of time pass from the energy abundance paper, being published. I'm curious, what the composition of pushback is. I mean, because on the surface, whether the options advocated for are right or wrong, it's hard for someone to say, hey, what we're doing now, electricity cost inflation and non-reliability and offshoring of industry, that's a good thing. Like on the surface, is the pushback more on the choices within it, or is there pushback that the system's not broken and it'll right itself at some point? Kind of a naive view.
Great question. No, I think the people, you're getting into sort of philosophy now, really. It's like Thomas Kuhn with his philosophy of science. Do people cling on to ideas despite the facts changing? Well, in terms of the ruling elite and the Labour government itself, and certainly our Secretary of State for Energy, Ed Miliband, no, I mean, there's no recognition that they're on the wrong course at all. So I think the problem is, although there will be people in the government that understand it, there will be civil servants that understand the crisis. I'm afraid the leadership certainly doesn't, and is still in denial. I mean, earlier on I talked about the problem of the cultural problem of indifference. you also have in your political elite a cultural problem of just pretense. So they're continuing to pretend that everything is okay as energy prices go up and up and up, and manufacturing goes down the drain. So it's a real problem, and that's why I think the solution has to be a new party. I mean, my party had an electoral alliance at the last general election with Reform UK, which is Nigel Farage's party. It was a small pact of 650 seats. We had a deal on 24 of those target seats, and it was successful from our point of view. I'm not sure if they'll do another one. They're leading the polls, and actually on the broad question of energy, their Reform UK are pretty good. I think the solution has to come from a new government. I don't believe, to answer your question, I don't believe that the Labour government in the UK is capable of actually changing course.
I was wondering, William, your party. It's interesting that the description of the SDP on the website is a patriotic, economically leaning, and culturally traditional political party. So, we have Democrats and Republicans, and they're not always the same flavor. But that description is sort of, I don't know, it sort of sounds like a 1950s U.S. Democratic Party. Like it's slightly, it believes in government involvement for sure.
Yeah.
It's heavy patriotism and heavy tradition. But maybe I could just ask you to help us understand the party a little better.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you for that. How do you describe it? Look, it's my job to describe it. So there are a lot of ways. You can say it's the party of the patriotic state. The strapline that we use is family, community, nation. Why? Because that's where we come together to work together. It's not all about me, it's about us. Faith, flag, and family is another description, but broadly it's the what we think is the winning position, which is a state that's capable, not a huge state. I've never argued for a massive state. I want a capable state. I want for instance, I want a state that understands that the basics include the production of abundant energy. That's quite important. I want it to be able to step up and do it. When we're on the sort of social market model we advocate, we'd have the state running railways, being in charge of the water supply and not selling these things off to foreign governments and creditors. I think you'd want to run them yourself. The state might even build some housing, but for most of the economy, we're very, very strongly pro-market. I mean, there's no doubt at all. The evidence is in that the best producers of normal goods and services is the private sector. So that's the balance. On the cultural side, I should mention that because it is a big thing now. I mean, it is obviously it is in the States just as it is here. So on the cultural side, we would describe ourselves as fairly traditional social conservatives, really. Know what a woman is. I think family is the foundation of society. And we believe in nation states and borders and so on. So if you say it sounds a bit sort of 1950s, that's fine by me. You can't turn the clock.
That sounds terrible. Let me rephrase. It sounded like the traditional Democratic Party, and I was quickly scanning through. I was thinking Harry Truman might be an SDP. That was.
I think that's right. I think actually even Kennedy actually. If it depends whose account you accept, but I mean and bringing it back to sort of up to date. I mean, 1950s is quite funny because I was at a book launch. One of my friends in politics is Danny Kruger, who's a conservative, who's just gone over to Nigel Farage's party, he's defected. And he wrote a very good book last year. And he said, people accuse social conservatives of wanting to go back to the 1950s. It's not true. He said it's the 1750s we're after, so it's very good. But no, I think J.D. Vance, actually, I would say he's quite close to where we are. And actually, certainly we can get into it. I'd love to talk about this if you're keen about tariffs and trade protection. We are virtually the only party in the UK that advocates some trade protection and tariff policy. And I think I mean, I know Vance has. I've got slightly more time for Vance than Trump on this, but I think Trump. I mean, Trump's. I mean, it's distorting. It's very him, isn't it, to use tariff and trade policy in the way he's doing it. I think you can advocate it in principle without. I don't think his particular approach of sharp turns and threatening 200% tariffs on trading partners is the way to go. But I do believe in them. Philosophically, I think trade protection definitely has a role.
It's really interesting you mentioned JD Vance, because I was also thinking about, I'm sure we're getting a distorted picture here in the US of what's going on in the UK and Europe, but JD Vance has notably commented about sort of the lack of open debate or some of those issues. And I guess my curiousness here is that, do you think some of these issues haven't been debated openly and honestly and with full transparency because we have culturally developed a problem of, we've decided for some reason we're not going to talk about certain things. There is something in Western culture, and energy's gotten pulled into it, and I'm wondering if you think that's contributed to the problem.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I think we have in England, particularly in the UK, we have very well established what we would call embedded rights. You know, we English people feel that they are living in a free country, and if they go to the pub, they can speak their mind. But actually, increasingly, you have a backlash against wrong speak, and people feel cowed, and there's a chilling effect, particularly in the universities. No different to the United States, I guess. I think you have much stronger constitutional rights to free speech than we do. But yeah, I mean, at the moment, I would say there's a free speech crisis in the UK. I know a number of people that have been arrested for saying the wrong thing or tweeting the wrong thing, or and this is not an environment which is conducive to free and rational, open freedom of debate and freedom of thought and inquiry. I mean, and you're quite right, actually. You do get dragged into speech codes on energy issues, and particularly where net zero is concerned, people are inclined to say, look, I think we burn. The first point I make on gas is I prefer to burn British gas than Norwegian gas. But if you're burning gas to keep the lights on, and you're using other hydrocarbons and oil, I'm not against decarbonisation in the long run, and we advocate it via nuclear, particularly. But you can't get there overnight, and we would point out that there's a basic dishonesty in terms of net zero, particularly in Europe, where we decarbonize and we deindustrialize, and Britain's technical record on net zero is superlative because we've knackered our your industries are just gone, and of course you've decarbonized, but you're still in terms of CO2 emissions, you're still 1% of global output, and we won't make any substantial difference to anything. And it's dishonest to then outsource your industry to some quite dirty industry. Certainly in China, some of the production of industrial products is not as clean as it would be here, and then import that and pretend that you're doing the right thing. So if you speak up on it, Maynard, you will get people saying you're climate deniers or whatever. But we're not. I mean, I would never say that. I would never deny climate change. Climate change is ubiquitous. I mean, it's constant throughout history. I'm sure industrial production that humankind has produced has contributed to it. So I wouldn't deny it. But you're quite right. I mean, if you take a view that we should open gas-fired power stations, we certainly get criticised from people for saying that. Yeah. But we don't care because we think it's right.
One thing that seems to have happened, at least in the U.S., William, is over time, it's my impression, it's become harder for for outsiders to be a part of the political system, harder to get appointed, harder to run and get elected. The system just over time, it kind of closed ranks a little bit, and it's not easy for business people to go to Washington, D.C. and be a part of conversations. And business people understand supply chains and costs and why people locate plants where they locate them. So it's a long way of asking, do you, in the UK elite, the UK governance, your own party, do you notice that that same thing has happened and not enough business people are involved who instinctively understand these issues in a way that really helps get them solved?
I think we probably share. We definitely have in the UK a problem of financial literacy and so on amongst our political class. That's definitely true. I mean, the number of MPs, members of Parliament that have got degrees has increased, but they're not the right degrees. Too few engineers, too few scientists. Too many arts grads probably. Certainly in trade economics, very, very few MPs understand even the basics of international trade, the mathematics of it, about deficits and so on. That is a problem. It's a very interesting question. I think we're slightly distorted. I mean, I could turn it back on from an American perspective and say that when Christopher Lasch was writing those books about criticizing American executives for closing down plants and offshoring industrial production to the Southeast Asia, it wouldn't have made any difference. I mean, greater influence from industry would have made no difference at that stage because the boards wanted to do it, right? So that they were beggaring themselves. It was probably a form of instant gratification, short-termism, probably looking at their bonuses and trying to produce profits in the next timeline rather than what's going to happen to the industrial town. So that's a separate thing. You might argue that it shouldn't have happened, but I would argue that at the time, the people that were controlling those corporations didn't really care about the industrial town very much. I think that is a problem. We've also got a slightly different position in the UK because we have a capital city which is vastly bigger than all of the others, and the capital city is dominated by financial services in the city. So I think one of the problems we have is that the people that would speak for Jim Radcliffe or would speak for Teesside and bulk chemicals are not influential in the UK. Why? Because the city is over-influential. So there's been a prioritization of services in the city of London. Shuffling money around is more important than making things. And that is a problem that we have to a greater extent. I mean, for instance, compare it to Germany. Manufacturing is in trouble in Germany for different reasons, but they've never lacked influence at government level, whereas I think industry in Britain has.
As you said that, I was imagining if energy policy was made in New York City, that might not go so well here. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, I just want to circle back to the 10-year plan. I mean, just for the viewers that don't know yet, it seems like, the plan is, this central energy is going to be the vertically integrated utility you guys are going to propose. It's going to be state run, number one. Yeah. Number two, it's 40 gigawatts of gas, 20 gigawatts of coal. Third, it's 40 gigawatts of nuclear. And the fourth thing is, I think prices are going to be fixed at 10 pence per kilowatt or something of that degree. Is that correct? I guess the one I really want to hit on is the nuclear. And your nuclear, you're really advocating not SMRs, but really the AP 1000s, the big nuclear. And I thought it was interesting when you were making the point that the government needs to finance that because they have, it's a cost of funds issue for them, right? All the funds are spent up front, whereas gas generation is the price of fuel over time. And, I thought that was interesting where everyone's thinking about going to SMRs and you're like, no, this is what we should be and the government should do it. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because SMRs in the UK are very topical because Rolls-Royce is advocating them. But actually, when the team looked at it, we just wanted something. One of the principles that we had in correcting this major error was brute force. we just looked. I asked them to work out the quantum that we'd need to stabilize the grid and to get prices down, and it was roughly 40 gigawatt. You'd have to do something very, very big. And yes, people that advocate SMRs say, well, you could just put a lot of them on the same site. No, I don't think that's right. I mean, ideally, in an ideal world, I'd want to reinvigorate British nuclear power again. But successive governments sold it to the French, and then started begging to the Chinese to build our nuclear power stations. But Westinghouse was basically the one of the two that we think are goers, and I think they would be. And I don't think you want to reinvent it. I mean, it is, some argue that design's a little bit cramped, but it's there, and it's a proven technology, and that, along with the South Korean option, I think those are the only two available to us, really, to do what and energy density is important. Actually, it's a point that we make in the Green Paper, that Britain is a relatively small island with 60, 70 million people, and if you compare nuclear, I mean, nuclear is the most energy dense form of energy you could have. It's the best and most long term. You know where you are. But compare it to wind power. Wind power is onshore wind is taking up 300 times as much space, and we lose farmland, so that's bad. So yeah, those are the two options we're looking at, tried and tested. The other point you make on financing is vitally important, because every single time it's been tried in the UK, you get private credit and the banks get involved. The difference, I mean, it's just the maths, I'm afraid, the discount rate, the difference it makes. If you even a 1 or 2 or 3% above, it'll double the cost of your project overall, even if the capex at the start is the same. So very, very important that we think it should be state funded. We acknowledge actually that the British 30-year, that the longer bonds are having a bit of a rocky time at the moment. I think the yield is up on British 30-year gilts is up to 5.5%. Some of that is actually probably inflation, and if we get inflation down next year, it could come down by a point probably. Because if you look at the differential between us and the French and the others, there isn't a rational reason apart from inflation that would explain that. But I still I mean, it's a very simple solution. They've thought very carefully about it, and basically the solution to solving this massive energy problem is brute force. And if it's not working, you're not using enough of it. So it's big nuclear and funded by the state, and get on with it. That's what we need to do.
The other thing I found in a report is your term, the dash to gas, which really kind of really stood out for me. It's like in late 90s and early 2000, all this combined cycle gas was put up, and obviously you had the North Sea, and that was easy to feed that. But we're 25 years in, 30 years in here. How much do you worry that we're going to continue to go down this renewables road, and we're going to start retiring some of the combined cycle just because it's old, and we're going to get in a bigger hole? It's going to get us to the crisis a little quicker than people think, because it's just economics, to be honest with you.
That's well observed, very well observed. I mean, it's a history lesson, but I'll remind partly the reason for the dash for gas was that the Conservatives that were governing at the time were very keen on it, because we had quite a lot of industrial unrest with the coal industry in the 1980s, had a massive coal strike mid-80s. And I think that, gas, put it crudely, gas doesn't go on strike. So they did that. And actually they decommissioned a lot of coal fired production capacity early, which we think was a mistake and certainly wrong. But no, I mean, look, again, if you're a politician, you're trying to explain to a town meeting what the problem is. One of the ways I do it with renewables is very basic and very true, which is if you rely on unreliable renewables, and you're talking about gas and solar, particularly in the UK, is not efficient. I mean, just geography. I mean, we just don't get enough solar, so that's not very efficient. But what do you do when the sun doesn't shine or the wind isn't blowing? Well, you have to have the real production. So in essence, if you're going for unreliable renewables, intermittents, you have to have two systems. You have to have two energy production systems. People wonder why we have higher energy prices, because we've got two systems. You shouldn't have two systems. You should have one reliable system. And so there we are. I mean, the other thing is interconnectors. I don't know if you have in the United States. Obviously, you have we learned in the tariff turbulence with Canada that, you know, there's a lot passes between Canada and the United States and the North. But you know, if we need grid electricity and there's no wind power at all in Scotland, we get it from interconnectors from France. About 10% capacity, actually. 10% of the system can be supplied from France, basically from their nuclear fleet. But you're right. I mean, honestly, if you look at the life cycle of these plants, it's all going to go wrong unless we do something about it pretty rapidly.
And maybe to keep on that path, to flesh out, you talked about what to do from a power generation standpoint. What policy or what industry push would you advocate for in terms of supplying the gas and the coal? Is that domestic, or would you propose importing those commodities?
Well, initially, coal, you'd have to import a substantial amount of it, you know, probably from Australia or maybe in Indonesia. But in the long run, we do have plenty of coal here. I mean, but the trouble is we've lost the industry. There's some open cast. I mean, and again, it's political. I mean, we there's a proposal for a new coking coal extraction in Cumbria, and most of the political class were against it and put every hurdle they could. But that's real leveling up. That's reindustrialization. We supported it. Alas, it doesn't get support. But yeah, no, I'm not. I think initially the team have advised us that you'd have to import coal.
I was curious, William, if you, from a U.S. perspective, particularly in light of the Russia-Ukraine war, and we're all of a mind to strengthen NATO, to strengthen the West, to be united. The U.S., what do you see as the U.S.'s role in trying to be influential here? I guess one question is what the U.S. is currently doing with its energy policy, is that affecting some of this discussion in the UK? Could the U.S. be more proactive, more helpful? Doesn't this it's slightly reminiscent of like a Marshall Plan type mentality, which is if our allies are stronger, then the U.S. is stronger. I'm just kind of curious, how do you see the U.S. influencing this positively?
Well, I mean, obviously, in terms of the nuclear production, we'd advocate Westinghouse is quite an important part of it, would be an important part of it probably. But also just day to day, if you look at the trade figures, I mean, there's certainly last year, I think the single biggest export from the United States to Britain was crude oil, and LNG imports are still very high as well. So it's actually absolutely key trading partner. I mean, I think when you look at it from our side of the tennis net, probably I think Americans would be keen on exporting for very sensible reasons. But looking much further ahead, I think geopolitically, the thing that people would be concerned about is the United States, because it has the potential to be a better semi-autarky in terms of energy, that it would go down that route and not really worry about the rest of the world too much. I think, certainly there are elements of that in Trump and Vance's thinking. And, we'll wait and see. I think the curious thing is, I don't think Europeans can't blame or rely on the United States when we've got our policy wrong, which we clearly have. I think that's the point. And I would argue, not just from a British point of view, but I would argue generally that nation states should think very carefully about energy resilience, particularly in the world that we live in now, which is geopolitically much more uncertain. So I think energy resilience is sensible anyway. If you can achieve it, you should try and achieve it.
Are you hearing from European counterparts who are interested in the paper, who are trying to change energy policy in their own countries, who have some of the same issues? What's that dialogue like?
We have sister parties that we speak to, but to be honest, I think each state is quite independent actually, and the body politic is, I mean, as you know, political cultures are different, and even the center of gravity that you might occupy can vary from one state to another. So no, I don't think there's been a huge amount. I think and certainly since Britain left the EU, I think we're more concerned with what happens here, and trying to get our policy right.
And do you find, I guess, as we wrap up, the pushback you're getting, have you been able to engage that pushback in some open forums, or is it are people talking past each other? Or are you finding that the debate is getting more serious about this, and even your opponents are leaning in and listening a little bit?
I think it's quite polarized, actually, and it probably is in the United States as well. So in the domains that, where we have political alliances, I mean, on some economics, on the state's role, we have different ideas from reform. But we would influence reform a little bit on this, I think. And certainly, as I say, there are conservatives in the Conservative Party that look at our stuff and read it and absorb it, and it becomes part of the language. So on our side, on the what I might call the realist side of the tennis net, I think we're winning the arguments. And I think, remember that I think we are the people towards the end of the decade that are going to be controlling policy, not the existing ruling elite, who I think are on their last legs. I think that's what will happen. As I said earlier, I don't think British policy will change until you get a different government. But when you do, then there's a lot that we would talk about now that we would hope would go straight into policy.
So you alluded to one of our favorite questions, which is trying to think 10 years out, trying to think what things might look like. When you think of the UK's future 10 years out, what do you think about? What do you think it looks like? Are you optimistic? How do you see the country's future?
I think it'll get worse. I think our macro position, our trading position, our debt position, and our energy position will probably get worse for a few years. But in the 30s, it's capable of being corrected. So I think I can't think beyond getting a government that actually is capable of correcting it. And it's the same as, I mean, the US debt position is scary, and some people say it's beyond the event horizon. But I would remind people that as soon, often a crisis can spur proper, serious adaptation to reality, material reality. And I think energy policy is all about materiality. What can you produce? How much does it cost? And does it support your industry and your prosperity? And that's the key question. And I think that in the ruling class, that still hasn't hit them, but it will. There will be people that govern the country quite soon, I hope, that get it. And as soon as they start correcting it, I believe you can do very well indeed.
Well, William, you've been most generous with your time. And as I say, we're so pleased that we found the paper. We're so interested in the paper. We're going to share the paper. And for you to spend this time talking about these issues with us, we really appreciate it. It's great.
It's been really, really kind of you to ask me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And take care, guys. Thank you.
Well, this is the special relationship. So we're pulling for you and for the UK.
That's great. Thank you. That's very kind.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.